Let me ask you something. Who are you? No, seriously, who are you really? Most people never stop and think about this question. They just accept whatever label, belief, or story they've been told about themselves. And that's exactly why they stay stuck. But this video is different. Today we're going to break down the most powerful force in your life, your identity. Because whether you realize it or not, your identity is the single most powerful thing in your life. Every decision you make, everything you do, and every result you get in your life is a direct reflection of how you see yourself. And what you need to understand is that we don't achieve goals. We become the type of person who achieves them. And so if you don't like where you are right now in your life, that's on you. But here's the good news. If you've built the identity that's holding you back, you can also build the one that propels you forward. And this is exactly what this masterclass is about. So, we're going to cover why your identity shapes your entire reality, how the beliefs you hold about yourself were formed, and how to break the ones limiting you. The painful but necessary process of becoming the person who deserves what they want, and a step by step framework to redefine yourself and finally take control. This isn't just theory, this is practical. So, if you're ready to stop being a follower and becoming the person that creates their own reality, stick with me. Let's get into it. The concept of identity is misconstructed in our modern society. The preposition that we base our lives on and our perspective has been developed through so that we are who we are and we cannot change our identity. But our identity is the strongest force in the world. And what that means is that who you think you are and who you believe you are and how you orient yourself and your self-image in the world against the reality itself determines what you get in life. In other words, everything is upstream of your identity. Any level of suffering that is inflicted upon you is coming from your identity and how you've tied yourself to the world. Because in order for us to effectively live and effectively operate in the world, we must assume an identity. Because to not have an identity in some way would basically be like floating in the ocean and being controlled by the winds. Identity is the single thing that we cling on to have some kind of order to base our decision making on. To not have an identity would be to have nothing, and that would leave you in an ocean of pure chaos. Identity is what brings order to our mind, and most people cling to the wrong thing. And whenever something comes up, the waves, the good people, suffering, bad people, they hold on to this identity for dear life. But sometimes you have to allow yourself to be taken by the storm, because you don't realize that typically upstream of the storm is another form of identity that you can cling on to. And what I want to say with that is that you need to allow yourself to enter the realm of chaos. Because when you discover something new, it is chaos, it is uncertainty. And let me ask you a question on that. What is a hero without a villain? What is order without chaos? What is happiness without sadness? For good to exist, bad must also exist. It's called the duality. You cannot have good without bad. I need you to imagine that what you want in life, what you so desire, a goal, an end destination, the ideal life for you, whatever that might look like, it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot of the future. It's an effect. It's something that exists in arbitrary terms in our imagination. It's a state of reality that can be manifested. And in order for us to manifest that state of reality, let's say this is your ideal future or goal. In order for us to manifest that reality, we have to become he who can. We have to become he who can. Understand, we don't achieve goals. We don't accomplish dreams. We don't accomplish dreams. We don't achieve anything. We become a certain type of person, and as a result of becoming that person, the goal naturally manifests. And let's do a little thought experiment here to clarify this point. Let's say you want to become a millionaire. Well, how do you become a millionaire? You become a millionaire by becoming the kind of person that can make $1 million. And that might sound a bit woo-wah at first, but just bear with me here. You don't go after the money. You go after the character, and by becoming the character that can make the money, you will. You don't make money. You make an identity and character. You make a character that can make the money. And by going after the character that can make the money, you will. You don't make money, you make an identity. And that identity goes into the world and attracts the money. Every decision that you ever made has led you up to this point where you are right now. Sit here watching me talk about this in your room, probably alone, in your dark room, whatever. Everything that you've ever done has led you up to this very moment. And so what that means is that where you are right now is your fault. It is your fault. And that might infuriate you, but the fact that all the suffering, all that you're not happy where you are right now is your fault. And it is your responsibility to change. You have done this to yourself. There's no one else that has done this to yourself. You have done this to yourself. Now from this, there are two emotional states that could result. The first one is anger. And the second emotional state is control. And there are going to be things that have happened to you in the past that made you suffer, that held you down, or maybe even traumatic events. But for as long as you blame them, and for as long as you point the finger of your miserable existence to these external things, you can never take control. Responsibility for your life and where you are right now is the cornerstone to growth. And until you sit down and you look yourself in the mirror and truly accept, not only accept, but truly understand that you are responsible for your life and no one has done this to you but yourself, you will never change and stay the same forever. So, what is this self-image? What is this identity that we talk of? This self doesn't really exist. It's merely you clinging onto stories about yourself that you taught yourself and you built up about yourself in the past. And so I ask you to point to your identity. What is it? What is this intangible reflection of self that we seem to have that controls our life and determines which path we take and what decisions we make? The thing that causes all of our suffering and pain of our miserable existence. And you might point to yourself and you say, well, this is me. I have a body, I have a name, I have a driving license, I have a passport. But that's not your identity. A name is not an identity. A name is just a collection of sounds. So you're not your name. And you're not your body, because your body is just flesh and bones, physical flesh and bones, with a certain pigment structure that every other person has. But it's certainly not your identity. It might be your body, but it's certainly not your identity. And so I ask you to battle with this and ask yourself, well, who am I? What are you? What is your identity? Think about this for a second. Your identity is basically a collection of belief systems. And for everything in your life, and also for those belief systems, you have a scale. And on one side of the scale, you have positive experiences. And on the other side of the scale, you have negative experiences. And so every belief operates like that. Let's say you have the belief of work ethic. Let's say you believe that you don't have a work ethic and you don't work hard, that you believe you're lazy. So this is a fragment of your identity. And let's say blue. Let's say this is your identity. And let's say you have the belief that you don't work hard. You don't have a good work ethic. So this is a fragment of your identity. And this belief, this fragment of your identity, has a scale. One side of the scale, positive experiences. Other side, negative experiences. Positive, negative. And so understand that your identity is basically a collection of fragments about how you've oriented yourself in the world, and all of this is a scale of all these fragments of the beliefs. And they compose your identity as a whole. And the scale that I just showed you, with the beliefs, with the positive experiences and the negative experiences, it will tip into either the positive or negative direction. It's a binary state. And what that means is that if you believe that you haven't got a good work ethic, it's purely because you've had lots of negative experiences by telling yourself that you don't have a work ethic. And every time you make a statement, every time you go back to the past and revisualize what happened to you, or something that affirms that specific fragment of your identity, what you're doing is something called self-solidification. If you believe you haven't got a good work ethic, it's because, for example, in school, your teacher told you don't work hard. That's the cornerstone of your very important fragment of your identity. It's a fragment, just like every other fragment. Every fragment has its own importance. because every fragment is a whole in itself, holism, holistic self, that composes your whole identity. And this is as important as this one. And let's say you actually see yourself as someone that doesn't have a work ethic. I'd ask you why. And you'd say, well, that's just who I am. Well, why are you just who you are? So it had to happen sometime. And so what we can usually do here is you can trace all of our identity and belief systems back to things that have happened to us when we were younger. And to stay on this example of you not having a work ethic, say you're 10 years old and you forget to do your homework. And in front of the entire class, your teacher says to you, Ilias, you just don't have a work ethic. You just don't work hard. Everyone sees it. And you being a 10-year-old, you go home to your mother and father and you say, Miss Miller said that I don't have work ethic. Miss Miller said that I don't work hard. And they say, well, maybe she's right. Maybe you haven't been really working. Who works at 10 years old? But this is what happens. And your 10-year-old you forms a belief about himself. And throughout his teenage years and early adulthood, all he does is act in accordance with what he believes to be true about himself. And what this is practice. Because for a human, it is near impossible to act out of alignment with something that he believes about it to be true about himself. And when you do that, when you try to act out of accordance and out of alignment with yourself and what you believe to be true, you experience something called cognitive dissonance, which is extremely hard to deal with because it's basically pain that comes as a result of us acting in a way that is completely counter to how we've oriented ourselves in the world. And what that is that the survival of your mental and conceptual body or identity is being threatened. Because as I told you in previous videos, we have a physical body, a physical identity, and a mental conceptual body. And our mental conceptual body is being threatened when we act out of alignment with how we've oriented ourselves in the world. And let's say, for example, if you don't believe me, if you think, Ilias, how can you say that? Of course I can act out of alignment with what I believe to be true. Well, take your political stance, take yourself over to the polling station and vote for the politician you hate. Well, I'm not going to do that, that's a stupid example. But that's your belief talking. Understand that people don't have beliefs. Beliefs have people. And so you can change your belief systems. If you're the person right now that believes that he hasn't got a good work ethic, you have to understand that that belief has a genesis. And it has a consistent reinforcement every time you tell yourself you don't have a good work ethic. Or every time you even think about this belief. And you're stacking that scale that we just talked about, that you're stacking the scale into the negative experiences to the point where you've polarized yourself. You've polarized yourself and assumed an identity, a very strong form of identity, against a specific facet of reality. And this we just talked about. We have the scale, positive experiences, negative experiences. And if you always tell yourself that let's take an example. If you tell yourself that you don't have a work ethic, over and over again, you reinforcing this belief, and over time you polarize yourself into assuming a very strong form of identity. It is very hard to get out of this. So you've polarized yourself. And the scale tips to the negative point, where the positive point is almost inevitable to reach ever again. And so let me ask you a question on this. And for this, I want you to write it down, or at least nod or shake your head in response to this question. Do you think there is at least a slim chance of you being successful in this world and achieving your goal? You have your goal, right? Do you think there's even a slim chance, it's just a minimal chance that you might be able to make it happen? Do you believe that to be true? Now you should either nod or shake your head, right? The answer is probably yes. But I'm sorry to tell you that there is no chance at all. Let me explain. If you were the kind of person that could have achieved your goal, then you would have already done it, or you'd be damn sight closer to it than you are now. And that is the sobering reality of modern society. Understand, We don't achieve goals. We don't accomplish dreams. We achieve characters. And so within your current character, there is no chance of you achieving your goal because who you are right now simply cannot. But who you need to become can. So let me re-ask the question. Do you think there's even a slim chance that you might be able to become the person capable of achieving your goal? And the answer to this question should be yes. If it's not yes, oh no, you're lost because your goal is outside of your control. Characters or people achieve goals. So if you want to achieve your goal, become the person that can. If you want to make $10,000 a month, if you want to make $100,000 a month, $1 million a year, ask yourself, what does this person look like? What identity do they have to assume? Make a list. Let's say the first two facets that you've identified to get to 10K a month, for example, are discipline and persuasion. And you might say, well, I'm already disciplined, I'm already persuasive. But I'd ask you to question that, because if you were, you'd already hit your goal of the 10K a month mark and you'd be continually growing. And as I mentioned earlier, you currently have a sense of self that you're going to cling on to. You're going to cling on to that sense of self for your life. You do not want to let go of your identity because that invites chaos. Chaos invites pain, and we don't want to experience pain because we as humans are pain averse. So imagine this. Set in front of you is, say green, imagine this. Set in front of you right now is a big stone, your character. And your character looks like a massive stone. This should be a stone, right? This represents your character. And our job as a young man that's trying to orient himself in this world and tries to become successful is to wake up every single day, get out your chisel, get out your hammer, and tap away at this rock. Tap away, tap away at this rock until you've developed the stone figure that you want to develop. But before we can do that, we have to define what we want that stone to look like. Because you can't just go to the rock and just chisel, tap away at this rock and just make lots of money, right? Because getting up and basically chiseling away at this rock with no objective, no vision, no desire for the end result and what you want that the end result to look like, is just not going to work. You can have a pretty messed up rock at the end, right? And that's what most people's lives look like, because they don't trust and they don't think about what they want, because they don't believe they can change, that their identity can be adapted. And so what is the psychological chisel that we use to form this rock, that we use to tap away this rock and create the stone figure that we want? And this chisel is pain. Pain is the currency that you have to pay for change. Pain is the currency of personal change, and the pain that we're talking about here is not physical pain. It's not hurting yourself, harming yourself in any way. The pain that we're talking about here is manifested when effort meets resistance. So here's how it works. You have your identity and you have your desired goal. Let me just draw it out. It's way easier to understand if I just draw it out. That's why I have a whiteboard here. A whiteboard. So you have your current identity. Current identity. And you have your desired identity. And for the simplicity of this example, current identity, no work ethic. Desired identity has a work ethic. And so what's going to happen in order for you to achieve that goal is you need to go from point A to point B. You need to go from this person over here to this person over here. And as we just talked about with the concept of cognitive dissonance, when you act out of accordance with yourself, this is the same thing. And when you start trying to make changes, when you start trying to act out of accordance with your self-image and your identity, resistance will manifest. And as we just said, resistance is any form of psychological pressure that is trying to prevent you from doing what needs to be done to change, because your current sense of self as an identity has what we call a psychological survival instinct. It doesn't want to die. It's just like any other organism. Your current identity doesn't want to die, and it holds on to you. You're not holding on to it, it's holding on to you. And all the stuff that comes up from your identity that prevents you from doing and working on doing the things which you know needs to be done to become this other person is what we call resistance. The doubts, the fear, the procrastination, the coping mechanisms, whatever it is, all these things are just resistance. There are your current sense of self desperately trying to survive. And when you meet this resistance as a result of your identity basically fading away, and you meet this resistance with effort, which is basically your human will, we get pain. And as we get pain, and we're going to talk about human will for a second, because I don't think everyone understands this topic. I'm an amateur myself, right? So, we want to talk about human will for a second. We can think of human will as kind of a battery, right? When you wake up in the morning, your battery, hopefully, after you slept for like 7-8 hours, is like here, 98% full. This is your willpower, right? And the second you wake up, if your phone is ringing and the alarm is going off, and the first thing you do in the morning is you grab your phone and you see all those notifications, you see all those notifications from friends, from social media, from everything, then this is challenging your willpower, your human will, because you know you shouldn't be doing that, and this is that will prevent you from developing and going to this new identity, new character that you want to go into. This is draining your battery. This is like getting you from a 98 to a, let's say, 70. And then after you wake up and your alarm goes off, you go down to the kitchen and you want to eat something for breakfast, right? And the only things that you see in your environment is chips, fast food, all this stuff, right? And your willpower is even more challenged when you see all this food that is unhealthy for you, that is you shouldn't eat, but it's challenging your willpower. You get the point. So the more environmental encouragement you have for draining your willpower will be depleted by the middle of the day or even the beginning of the day, and you won't have anything left. And when your willpower is drained, well, then the identity we want to get rid of is gonna get stronger, and it's gonna pull us back into something we call self-sabotage. And self-sabotage is very likely to happen when your willpower is depleted. So this is just a little excursion on the topic of willpower, right? And the most important thing to remember here is that our willpower is limited, and we should make it as easy as possible to win and as hard as possible to lose. So environmental encouragement. Well, we're going to talk about this in a second, right? And as I said, the single greatest currency you have for change is pain. And so every time you go into a painful situation to change your identity, you experience pain. But every time you experience pain, you're building up your pain bank, your psychological pain bank. And what is your psychological pain bank? The pain bank. It's another very interesting and important concept right here. What's going to happen is God, or the universe, or whatever you believe in, is going to watch you. And there's a quote by Charlie Munger that says, "To get what you want, you have to deserve what you want. The world is not yet a crazy enough place to reward a whole bunch of undeserving people." And what does deserving mean? What does the word mean, to deserve? To deserve basically means to suffer. If you want something, you have to deserve it. What is the first principle of deserving something? The first principle of deserving something is going through something painful to get it, right? So you want to invite as much pain as possible, as much meaningful suffering and pain as possible, and it is productive pain, right? We don't want to harm ourselves or any self-inflicted harm. But what I'm trying to tell you here is meaningful pain that comes as a result of your human will, as we just said, your human will combating the resistance that's manifested from your current sense of self and identity that's trying to survive. Okay, Be complex, right? So you have your current identity. Let's just draw in the segments for you to understand. It's very simple. So current identity, right here. Current identity. And this is the identity of the person you need to become in order to achieve your goal, right? Because we don't achieve goals, we achieve an identity and character. And this is your character that you want to achieve, you want to become. And you've built this character, your current character, for decades. You've reinforced the beliefs, everything that you are right now and that you believe you are right now is this, your current identity. And if you want to act out of accordance, out of alignment with what he believes to be true about himself, pain is gonna manifest, right? And if you meet this pain and this resistance essentially with effort, this identity is gonna suffer and it is gonna fade. It's gonna fade away because you're gonna step into this character that you want to become to achieve your goal. And essentially what happens is that the more pain you overcome, the more resistance you meet with effort, the further you are on this path, essentially, to become this type of person. I hope you get the point right now. And if you do this for long enough, you meet the resistance with effort, and you overcome the pain that's being created, God, or the universe, or whatever you believe in, will watch you, and time will elapse. And that's what everyone gets wrong about this. It takes time for you to deserve something. It takes time. As time elapses, you'll be able to bargain with God or the universe, because what you do when you set a goal is you say, I want this. But in order for you to get it, you have to give. And because this entire world revolves around operates on the nature of transactions, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. If the action is your goal, so if the action is you achieving your goal, then the reaction that needs to come from you is pain. And to get what you want, you have to deserve what you want. Let's say you want financial freedom and you say, I want my dream body, I want my dream wife, I want to be able to travel whenever I want, wherever I want, with whoever I want for as long as I want, right? This is the typical kind of wealth and freedom that people want. God or the universe is going to say, okay, well, I'm willing to give you those things, but in order for you to get those things, you have to deserve them. And to deserve them, you have to go from who you are right now into the person who you need to become to deserve it. And the thing that bridges this path, let me just draw it out right here. It is way simpler if I just stop talking to the camera and just write it out, right? I think that's way more helpful. And so the thing that bridges the gap between where you are right now, this is you, and where you want to be, say that's a goal. The thing that bridges this gap, you guessed it, is pain. And so you're bargaining with God or the universe as time will elapse, and there will come a time when you become the person who you needed to become through building up your pain reserves in the pain bank, as we just talked about. And every single day, waking up, chipping away at this rock that we just talked about, this potential, this big ass rock, you're chipping away, waking up, chipping away at this rock, you eventually finish the sculpture that you set yourself, and you step back and you look at it and you say, wow, hang on a minute, I've got everything that I want and more. What you need to understand here is that pain is unavoidable. Path number one is you keep doing what you're doing. You deny responsibility for your current situation, you ignore signs for change, and you end up somewhere you most likely don't want to be, because this life isn't your personal creation. You went down this path unconsciously, writing yourself into hell without even knowing it. That's path one, and it sucks. And you're at the mercy of the circumstances. You're at the mercy of the externals. You have no control over your life. You have no sense of fulfillment or meaning. You just flow through the life feeling unworthy and undeserving, but your ego protects you. And this is what's very interesting. Your ego, we're going to talk about ego in a second. Hold up. Your ego protects you from feeling bad about your situation, seeing the reality of your miserable life. It protects you from shame. It protects you from thinking that it is your fault. It convinces you that it's not really your fault. Everything is just down to luck, and you just write yourself off as a victim. And in some time, when you die, you go down as just another man. No impact. You just existed. That's painful. And you might not be in much pain right now, but the suffering that you feel right now is only going to get worse. Option number 2 is you become the hero archetype who defeats the villain, slays the dragon. But in order for you to do that, you have to seek the pain and you have to enjoy it. Now, we talked about the ego, we talked about all the basic fundamentals of identity and self-image. I want to share a book with you real quick. Wait a second. Hang on. I've shared this book in one of our previous videos already, but Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz is one of the best books for the fundamental understanding of the self-image and how and why you present yourself in a certain way to the world. So I highly recommend buying this book. And also, as you can see, after every chapter, there is a little question for you to implement in your life right now and answer the question and the concept that's just been covered. Anyways, just check out the book, buy it, I highly recommend. The world famous psychiatrist Carl Jung was, next to Sigmund Freud, one of the leading people in the study of our mind and our identity. And he was the one that established the concept of a shadow that every one of us has. So we're going to take a look at the very classic diagram, which you can already see here, that Carl Jung established, and we'll try to find insights as to what our identity is and how our self-image works. So here it is, and this is you. And you have a lot of thoughts and feelings in your conscious but also unconscious mind. But then what you also have is you have a sense of ego. And ego is a Latin word which means I. And what that essentially is just the sense of I am this. I am this. The ego is the part of you that you are consciously aware of. And if I were to ask you who you are, your mind is going to have a certain perception of who you are. I'm a good person, I'm ambitious, etc. So those are your internal thoughts. And this part of the ego is what we've talked about with the different facets of identity. But then between your ego and the outer world is something called the persona. And what the persona basically is different attributes of myself that I show to the outside world. So again, if I were to ask you who you are, your mind would describe certain attributes of your consciously active ego, and this ego is projected into the outer world in a certain way, which is directed by your persona. So if we think about identity in a deeper sense, we could say that there is who you are on the inside and there is who you are on the outside. And a very easy way to expose this inner self is to notice your desires when you're alone by yourself. When you sit somewhere, maybe in your room, and nobody else sees you, this is the moment your inner self will try and start to talk to you. And the way that these parts of your identity try to communicate with you is through emotions. But we'll go deeper into this later. Okay, now that we have a basic understanding of how your conscious part of your identity works and is built, let's go over into the bit darker part, which is your shadow. And let's say you're a kid. Let's say you're a kid that hasn't experienced that much in this world, and you have all these impulses that come from your brain. And maybe you want to make some weird noises in public, or you want to jump on things while you walk through the woods, or anything like that, And this is where it gets interesting. Now what happens is that these impulses, when they come up, let me just erase that real quick. So you're a kid, and you have impulses to do things, and you haven't experienced them much, so you don't even know if you can act on these impulses or you can't. And this is where it gets very interesting. So you're a kid, right? You're a kid, and you have all these impulses. You want to do this, you want to make some weird noises, anything like that, right? And now what's going to happen is that when these impulses come up and you want to act on them, society is going to either punish you for it or accept one of these impulses. And let's say one of these errors is an impulse, right? And society is either going to punish you for it, so punish you for it, or it's going to accept one of those impulses. So based on this feedback mechanism, you are made to feel good or bad depending on what you do. Because if you do that, you'll be punished, and nobody wants to be punished or experience pain, as we just said, pain avoiding creatures. So then what happens to this child? What happens to all these impulses, that all these curiosities that this child had? They start to suppress these impulses, these attributes of identity that they want to express. They start to suppress those impulses because they learn that if they do that, that is bad. So I don't do it. And over time, they begin to do more and more of those things that society deems as good. And they suppress and suppress more of those things that society punishes them for. And one example I can give you for this is like, oh, I'm not going to be angry. I'm going to smile. I'm going to be kind, all that. But then the question arises, where all that stuff goes that you have blocked off, that you have suppressed. Where does all that stuff go? And that is what becomes your shadow. You get the point. Okay, to not go too deep into societal conditioning and culture, let's stay on the main topic of identity. By the way, culture is nothing more than a group habit. It is to behave, it is to think and act in a specific way that is accepted within a specific group of people. And what a lot of people tell you when it comes to changing your sense of self is to, just believe in yourself. Just, be happy. All these mental masturbation positive affirmations. But let me tell you why this does not work and why you most likely failed at them too. I think we can all agree on the fact that whatever you want to achieve, the first step into achieving it is actually believing that you can, believing in the possibility of the achievement. Because let's say you have the belief that you aren't attractive, for example, and you experience external feedback and validation from other people that it actually is that way. So this belief, as we illustrated earlier, goes down this binary state. It goes down this binary state of positive and negative experiences. And if you experience all this external validation and feedback, that your belief is reinforced. That's your belief is that you are not attractive, right? Not attractive. But then if someone comes to you and just tells you to believe in yourself, it's impossible because all the feedback that you've got said that your belief is true. So how do we really escape this? We need to experience positive feedback, because all the negative feedback is what got you into point in the first place. So we need to experience positive feedback. And by experiencing positive feedback, we can put the scale on an equal level again, and then more and more over time, positive feedback is going to tip the scale into the binary state where the positive belief outweighs the negative belief. And when we try to fight our beliefs with just theory and telling it to believe something, it doesn't work, because our brain creates stories around experiences that we had. So continual positive feedback will introduce the possibility to your mind that, well, I might actually be attractive and my previous belief is faulty. And to create this positive feedback, you don't even need to do anything complex. Just one small win that gives you the sense of achievement. And on the example that we just had with you not feeling attractive, maybe cold approach some girls and try to start a conversation. If they don't agree or they don't engage in the conversation, well, try again, and hopefully one time it'll work out. I know that example wasn't the best, but you get the point. You need to make this task, this one simple win, so stupidly simple and easy that it becomes hard to say no. If the task in front of you is so stupidly simple that you can't do anything but just do it. The mind loves complexity. Why? Because then you have so many excuses that could save you from confronting the resistance, as we just talked about earlier. And if you see yourself as a loser or someone that cannot be successful, then you're not going to be successful. You're not going to do anything to improve your life, because your actions define your character. So after everything that we've been talking about, how do we actually change who we are? And I think this is a very difficult question, because if we say that actions define your character, we can say that a good person is defined by doing good things. But a bad person could do those exact things just as well. So we really need to define and dissect this question. And to do that, I want to bring a quote by Alex Hormozy on this, and which he said, charisma, one single word which is composed of multiple sets of actions. So as we talked about earlier, we want to create this character. We want to create the person we need to become that achieves our goal as a byproduct of being him, having his identity. And so how do we do that? We make a list of all the characteristics of that person. Let's say you want to be more charismatic. So you want to be more charismatic. Charisma is your goal. Well, how do we do that, and what does this word mean to you? We describe someone as charismatic if he nods when you're talking, repeats back what you just said, they smile, they use different tonalities when they talk, they shake hands firmly, they make eye contact, all this stuff. And notice that all I did was just list actions. So what we really need to break down is every characteristic that we wrote down for this person into sets of actions that make up this specific word. So think of your ideal self, the self that can actually achieve the goal that you have. Think of all the traits you want this person to have and what behaviors are associated with these traits. Let's say you want to become more charismatic, as I just said, and you say, I wish I'd be more X. But then understand that you can be that by just acting like him and behaving in these kinds of ways. Because whenever I get confused about what to do, I just break it down. And this creates clarity because we don't need motivation, we need clarity. Doing is being. Okay, let's break this down. We have three things that we want to focus on here. We have, let's just erase that. We have be, we have do, and we have. And people say that you have to become the type of person to do this type of stuff, to have this thing. So in this order, you have to be, to do, to have this kind of thing. But then if the doing creates the having, then we don't need to worry about having, because the doing is what we can control, the input. Let me say that again. Our goal is an effect, an output. And for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And that means our input will create the output, our goal, by natural law. And now comes the interesting part. If we describe someone only by the behaviors they do, then being also happens as a result of doing. Let's say that again. If we describe someone only by the behaviors they do, then who they are is a result of what they do. And as we just said, those are the inputs for having, and the results of doing is having, and also the result of doing is being. So we don't even have to worry about anything that is concerned with being or having, and we just do. And to make this whole process even easier, just take 3 to 5 people that you admire, that you look up to, and intelligently mimic them. But not mimic their current actions and their current behaviors, not the actions they are doing right now, but the behaviors they had when they were at your position. Alright, now that we've been talking about identity, self-image, and what it takes to achieve your goals, I want to give you a little introduction of what we'll cover in the next videos. We're going to talk about systems thinking and goals. So assuming that you've been watching my other videos, you understand that everyone acts because of a goal. Everyone acts out of a goal. The overarching goal may be survival, but on the hierarchy of human wants and needs, there are a lot of other goals that humans have adopted. Now, you might ask yourself, why does this guy talk about goals all the time? Let me tell you. A goal requires a system to be achieved, and a system takes trial and error to become efficient. And we have the biological goals of walking and talking to survive. And those are not the only ones. No matter which goals you had, they weren't as easy for you back then as they are now. And what happens is that your mind receives negative feedback from your environment, just like we talked about earlier on the topic of societal conditioning, where this feedback leads to those systems becoming more efficient to achieve your goal of the primary goal of surviving. And you not only had the goals of survival when growing up, what about the goals of going to school, getting a high-paying job, and retiring at an age where you have little to no time left to enjoy life? Society itself is a behavior system. And those three goals that I just listed, they got injected into our minds right when we learned to comprehend the language that we speak. And as we will learn, our mind and our identity act as a filter for reality and limits information that we can perceive, thus limiting the possible opportunities that we act on. But because we never questioned those goals, and most people still don't, they are only interpreting everyday situations through the lens of this goal. Because what happens is that when we set a goal, we prime our mind to notice information that could help us in the achievement of that goal. And now, guess what? Everyone that doesn't question those goals they pursue will perceive and therefore end up at. Correct. Achieving or at least working toward those three predetermined goals. And so what that tells us is that success isn't really planned, it is automatic. And if you want to go really deep into the topic of self-image and the automatic success mechanism that our mind is, I highly recommend picking up the book Psycho-Cybernetics. Okay, so what that means is that one of the things that differentiates successful people from unsuccessful people is how they've programmed their mind. So to conclude what we've just been saying here, goals, or more importantly self-defined goals, are what brings the good life. Because goals change how you interpret situations, which influences your actions, which is, as we just said, the only thing we can control and really matters, the doing, because having and being results from that, which then programs your identity, which then compounds over years into the life you want. And so you can't solve a problem if you aren't even aware of it. And that's exactly what people do in ads, sales calls, all of this stuff, right? They try to make you aware of the pain that you feel, which is created by a problem that the person pitching you can solve. So every problem that you have creates a pain. The problem creates pain. And in order for you to solve that problem, you need to have the awareness. You need to be aware of that pain. We need to be aware of the pain that the problem creates. And the person coming in ads or sales calls is making you aware of the pain that is being created by the problem. And they have a solution, and they know how to solve the problem to alleviate the pain. And if that sounds familiar to you, that is the value equation, and that is what value is. But this is for a different time. But value is created when pain is alleviated. Pain is alleviated when problems are solved, and problems are solved when you have the awareness of the pain that is being created by the problem. Okay, but we're getting a bit off course here. Okay, I want to include a concept right now that most of you watching probably already know. But the concept I'm talking about here is entropy. And for those of you that don't know, entropy essentially describes the tendency of a system towards disorder, unless energy is being invested to maintain order. And what that means is that for us to maintain the order of the system that our goal is, we need to invest energy into that goal for it to survive. Why do I say survive? Well, because as I said earlier, humans don't only survive on a physical level, we also survive on a conceptual mental level. And that includes our ego as well as our goals. So if we deem our goals as important and you have a meaningful reason for connected to it, you will experience a lot of painful resistance if you want to act in a way that would hurt your progress towards your goal. And those actions that affect your goal negatively or in a negative way will present themselves as threats to your mental conceptual survival. You get the point. So what we really need when we talk about entropy and setting goals is we need order in our minds. And that order is created by a daily routine, which is basically a set of practical goals which, well, bring order to your mind. And we'll talk about how to build out this routine in one of the next videos because I'm working on it currently and I don't have a fully built out routine right now. But for now, just audit your day for once. What do you do in a day? And is every action that I take in alignment with the goal that I have? If not, why? Ask yourself these questions. Alright, I believe that was a lot of information for today. I hope you had your notes out and you kept focused throughout this whole 15-minute video or something. I appreciate you watching, and for those that didn't take notes, Here's a small little summary of the main points we've covered today. The reason you haven't achieved your goal is that you aren't the person that would have achieved that goal. People love to separate being, doing, and having, but if you really think about it, being and having is the simple result of doing, so just do. Understand that you have to pay a price, inputs, in order for you to achieve your goal, output. The price is pain, and the more pain you go through, the higher the likelihood of you achieving your goal. And that's basically it for today's video. Please let me know what you think about it. Comment down below what your main takeaway from this video was. If you want to have a free helping tool for setting goals, check out the first link in the description of this video. Have a nice day. Bye.